The sun was dipping low over the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, casting golden shadows on a small market where kids laughed and vendors called out their wares. In a quiet corner, a young boy named Kofi sat under a mango tree, clutching a battered radio. It crackled with static, but through the noise came a voice, warm, booming, and full of heart. "You gotta jump, man. Take that leap," the voice said, cutting through the evening air. Thousands of miles away in a bright studio in Los Angeles, Steve Harvey leaned into his microphone, unaware that his words were reaching a boy in Burkina Faso who dreamed of something bigger than his struggles. That same night, in a modest office, in the capital, a young soldier named Ibrahim Traoré stared out a window, his mind heavy with the weight of a nation. He'd just led a coup, taken the reins of a country torn by violence, and yet he found himself humming a tune he'd heard on a talk show years ago, a tune about never giving up. Two men, worlds apart, connected by a thread of hope neither knew they shared. But what happens when their stories collide? When words spoken on a stage in America spark a fire in the heart of a leader in Africa? This is a story about how hope travels, how voices carry, and how two men, one a comedian, the other a revolutionary, find themselves bound by the same dream. Picture this: a packed studio, lights blazing, the crowd buzzing with energy. Steve Harvey walks out, suit sharp, smile wide, ready to deliver another dose of laughter and life lessons. It's 2025, and his show is a beacon for millions, from single moms in Chicago to dreamers in distant villages. He's talking about purpose today, sharing how he went from sleeping in his car to hosting Family Feud. The audience is hanging on his every word, but something's different tonight. There's a spark in the air, like the universe is about to pull a fast one. Steve's in the middle of a story about his mama's prayers when a production assistant slips onto the stage, her face tense. She whispers something and Steve's smile falters. He looks at the camera, eyebrows raised, and says, "Hold up, y'all. I just got word there's a message for me, and it's from Burkina Faso." The crowd murmurs, confused. Burkina Faso. Why would a country halfway across the world be reaching out to Steve Harvey? He sits down, adjusts his tie, and tries to play it cool, but his hands are shaking just a little. The screen behind him flickers, and there it is, the golden seal of Burkina Faso, with the words, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." The studio goes dead quiet. Steve's eyes widen. "The president?" he says, voice barely above a whisper. "What's he want with me?" Now, let's rewind a bit to Burkina Faso, where Ibrahim Traoré is no ordinary leader. He's 36, the youngest head of state in Africa, a soldier who stepped into power after a coup in 2022. To some, he's a hero, a modern-day Thomas Sankara, fighting to free his country from foreign influence. To others, he's a question mark, a man leading a nation battered by jihadist attacks and poverty. But to the people of Burkina Faso, he's a symbol of grit, a leader who's been through the fire and come out swinging. That night, as Steve's show plays on a grainy TV in a village cafe, Traoré's aides are drafting something unexpected. They're not working on a military plan or a speech about the alliance of Sahel states. They're preparing a message, one that's personal, raw, and meant for a man they've never met. Traoré sits at his desk, pen in hand, thinking about his own childhood, nights spent hungry, days walking barefoot to school, and a grandmother who taught him to keep going, no matter what. Somewhere along the way, he heard Steve Harvey's voice, maybe on a radio or a pirated DVD, talking about faith and second chances. It stuck with him, like a seed planted in dry soil, waiting for the right moment to grow. Back in the studio, the screen lights up, and there's Traoré, strong jaw, calm eyes, the Burkina Faso flag behind him. The audience holds its breath. Steve leans forward, gripping the arms of his chair like he's bracing for impact. "Mr. Steve Harvey," Traoré begins, his voice steady but warm, with a slight accent that carries the weight of his story. "I speak to you not as a president, but as a brother." The crowd gasps softly. Steve's mouth opens, but no words come out. Traoré keeps going. "In my country, your voice has reached places you'll never see. Your words about struggle, about rising up, They've given hope to people who have little else. Steve blinks, his eyes starting to glisten. Traoré's voice softens. When I was a boy hiding from the world's chaos, I heard you say, "Don't quit," and I didn't. The studio is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Steve's hand goes to his face, wiping away a tear he didn't expect to shed. Traoré smiles faintly. You don't know me, but I know you, and I want to thank you. The screen fades to black, but the words linger, heavy and real. Steve sits there stunned, the crowd too emotional to clap. He tries to speak, but his voice cracks. I don't even know what to say, he manages, looking at the camera like he's searching for answers. I'm just a guy from Cleveland. How's my voice reaching a president in Africa? The audience murmurs, some crying, others nodding like they get it. Because this isn't just about Steve or Traoré, it's about how hope can bridge oceans, how a single story can ripple through lives you'll never meet. But here's the thing. Traoré's message isn't done. There's a second part, something he didn't say on the video. A producer slips Steve a note during the commercial break, and his eyes widen as he reads it. It's an invitation, not for a photo op or a press stunt, but for something personal. Traoré wants Steve to come to Burkina Faso to meet someone who's been waiting to thank him in person, someone whose life changed because of a voice on a radio. Steve looks up, his heart racing. Who is it? He asks the producer. She shakes her head. They wouldn't say, but it's important. As the show ends, Steve's still holding the note, his mind spinning. He's used to big moments, Emmys, sold-out shows, but this feels different. It's like the universe is pulling him towards something bigger than fame. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Kofi, the boy under the mango tree, is writing in a notebook, his small hands trembling. He's heard Steve's voice his whole life, through crackling radios and shared earbuds. He's only 12, but he's got dreams too big for his village. Dreams of building schools, of telling stories like the man on the radio. And now, he's heard a rumor. Steve Harvey might be coming. Kofi's letter is simple, just a few lines, but it carries a question that could change everything. As he seals it, his eyes shine with hope and fear. Will Steve read it? Will he care? Across the ocean, Steve boards a plane, the note from Traoré tucked in his pocket. He's not sure what's waiting for him in Burkina Faso, but he knows one thing. This trip isn't about a show, it's about a promise. Maybe to Kofi, maybe to himself. As the plane lifts off, one question hangs in the air. Who's waiting for Steve in that dusty village, and what will they say that could change? Both their lives forever? Steve Harvey's plane cut through the clouds, the hum of the engines a steady rhythm against his racing thoughts. He sat by the window, the note from President Ibrahim Traoré crumpled in his hand, the words still burning in his mind. Come to Burkina Faso. There's someone you need to meet. He'd read it 100 times since takeoff, each time wondering who this person could be. A fan? A family member of Traoré's? Or someone whose life he'd touched without even knowing? Steve's assistant sitting across from him noticed his unease. You okay, boss? She asked, her voice soft. Steve shook his head, a half smile breaking through. I don't know. Lisa? I'm flying to a place I've never been, to meet someone I don't know because a president I never met says I changed his life. You tell me if that sounds okay. Lisa chuckled, but Steve's eyes drifted back to the window. He thought about his childhood in Cleveland, the nights he went to bed hungry, the times he doubted he'd ever make it. Now here he was, a comedian-turned-global voice heading to Burkina Faso on a hunch that felt like fate. But beneath the excitement, a knot of fear tightened in his chest. What if he wasn't ready for whatever waited for him? What if this trip was more than he could handle? In Ouagadougou, the capital was buzzing with whispers. Word had spread that Steve Harvey, the man whose voice echoed through radios and TVs in even the smallest villages, was coming. Kofi, the 12-year-old boy with the notebook, sat in his family's small mud brick home, his heart pounding. He'd spent the last 2 nights rewriting his letter to Steve, each draft more careful than the last. "Dear Mr. Steve," it began, "your voice told me I could be more than my pain." Kofi's mother, Amina, watched him from the doorway, her face lined with worry. She'd lost her husband to the violence that plagued Burkina Faso, and now she worked long hours weaving baskets to keep Kofi in school. She knew her son's dreams were big, too big maybe for a boy in a village where survival was the only goal. "Kofi," she said gently, "why do you think this man will read your letter?" Kofi looked up, his eyes fierce with hope. "Because he knows what it's like to have nothing, Mama. He'll understand." Amina smiled, but her heart ached. She wanted to believe in Kofi's dream. But the world had taught her hope could be a dangerous thing. Outside, the village was preparing for Steve's arrival, with children practicing songs and elders debating what it meant for a man like him to visit. But not everyone was excited. Some whispered that Traoré was using Steve for politics, to boost his image as a leader who could draw global attention. Others wondered if Steve's visit would bring real change or just a fleeting moment of fame. Meanwhile, in a modest government building, Ibrahim Traoré sat with his closest aide, Mariam, planning Steve's visit. The room was plain, with a single Burkina Faso flag on the wall and a stack of papers detailing the country's struggles, jihadist attacks, food shortages, and a recent coup attempt that had shaken Traoré's grip on power. He rubbed his temples, exhausted. "Why him, Ibrahim?" Mariam asked, her voice sharp. "You're fighting to keep this country together, and you're bringing in a comedian?" Traoré leaned back, his eyes distant. "He's more than that, Mariam. When I was 15, hiding in a shed during a rebel attack, I heard his voice on a radio. He was talking about losing everything but still believing. That stuck with me." Mariam frowned. "And you think he can help us now?" "The people need food, security, not stories." Traoré's jaw tightened. "They need hope too. Steve's voice carries further than mine ever could." But Mariam wasn't convinced. She saw the risk. Inviting a celebrity could make Traoré look desperate or worse, distract from the real fight. Yet Traoré's mind was set. He wasn't just inviting Steve for the cameras. There was someone specific he wanted Steve to meet. Someone whose story mirrored both their pasts. He wouldn't tell Mariam who, only that it was personal. "Trust me," he said. "This is bigger than politics." Back on the plane, Steve pulled out his journal, something he hadn't touched in years. He started writing, his pen moving fast. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he wrote. "I've spoken to millions, but this feels different, like God's testing me." He thought about his own grandmother, who'd raised him with tough love and prayers, telling him he was meant for something great. He wondered if Traoré had someone like that, someone who saw the spark in him when the world didn't. As the plane began its descent, Steve's phone buzzed with a text from his producer back in LA. "Social media's going wild. They're calling this your Africa moment. Don't mess it up." Steve laughed, but the pressure was real. The world was watching, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to carry their expectations. What if this mystery person Traoré wanted him to meet didn't live up to the hype? Or worse, what if they expected something from him he couldn't give? In the village, Kofi's schoolteacher, Madame Diallo, gathered the children to rehearse a welcome song for Steve. She was proud, but nervous. She'd grown up listening to Steve Harvey's shows, smuggled on old DVDs, and his words about resilience had kept her going through hard times. But she also knew Burkina Faso's reality: poverty, violence, and a government struggling to deliver. She worried Steve's visit might raise hopes that would only be crushed. "Kofi," she said, pulling him aside, "you know he's just a man, right? He can't fix everything." Kofi nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. To him, Steve was more than a man. He was proof that dreams could come true. Madame Diallo sighed, thinking of her own dreams, long buried under the weight of teaching in a village with no books. She didn't know Kofi had slipped his letter into the pile of gifts for Steve, or that it held a question that could unravel everything. "Mr. Steve, can you help me build a school so kids like me can dream bigger?" As Steve's plane touched down, the runway dust swirled under the morning sun. He stepped out, shielding his eyes, and saw a small group waiting. No cameras, no fanfare, just a few soldiers and a tall man in a simple white shirt. It was Traoré, himself. Steve's heart skipped. This wasn't a photo op, it was real. Traoré walked up and hugged him. No words, just a grip that said they'd both known struggle. "Welcome, brother," Traoré said, his voice low. Steve nodded, too choked up to speak. They drove through Ouagadougou's bustling streets, kids waving, women staring. Steve's eyes caught a handmade sign. "Steve Harvey, you give us hope." He swallowed hard. The car stopped at a small village where a crowd of children waited, their voices rising in a song that felt strangely familiar, like something his own grandmother might have hummed. Traoré leaned in. "There's someone here who's been waiting for you," he said. Steve's pulse quickened. "Who?" he asked. Traoré pointed to a boy in the crowd clutching a notebook, his eyes wide with hope and fear. "Him," Traoré said. "His name's Kofi." Steve froze, the weight of the moment hitting him. What did this boy want? What could Steve possibly give him? As Kofi stepped forward, letter in hand, the air grew thick with anticipation. The crowd hushed and Steve felt the world narrow to this one moment, this one boy, and a question that could change them both forever. Kofi stood there, his small frame trembling as he clutched the notebook, his eyes locked on Steve Harvey. The village square was silent, the crowd holding its breath, as if the dusty air itself was waiting for what came next. Steve knelt down, to Kofi's level, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of every gaze, Traoré's, the children's, the elders. But it was Kofi's eyes that held him. They were wide, full of hope, but also something deeper, something that reminded Steve of himself at that age, dreaming big in a world that felt too small. "Hey, Kofi," Steve said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "What you got there?" Kofi swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he handed over the notebook. Steve opened it, his fingers brushing the worn pages, and started reading. "Dear Mr. Steve Lott," the letter began. "Your voice told me I could be more than my pain. My papa died in the fighting, my mama's sick. But you said we're born for something great. I want to build a school so kids like me can dream. Can you help?" Steve's breath caught. He looked up at Kofi, then back at the letter, his eyes stinging. The crowd murmured, sensing the moment's weight. Traoré stepped closer, his face calm but intense. "This boy," Traoré said, "heard you when he had nothing else, just like I did." Steve stood, clutching the notebook like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. His mind raced back to Cleveland, to the nights he'd prayed for, a way out, to his grandmother's voice telling him to keep going. He looked at Kofi, then at Traoré, and something clicked. This wasn't just about a letter or a visit. It was about a promise he'd made to himself long ago to give back if he ever made it. But the stakes were higher now. Kofi wasn't just asking for a school. He was asking Steve to believe in him, to prove that hope wasn't just words on a radio. Steve's throat tightened. He'd given millions in charity, built programs through his foundation. But this felt different. This was one boy, one dream, and a village watching to see if he'd deliver. "Kofi," Steve said, his voice cracking, "you wrote this all by yourself?" Kofi nodded, his eyes shining. "Yes, sir, I listen to you every day." "You said to jump, I'm trying." The crowd gasped softly, and Steve felt a tear slip down his cheek. He turned to Traoré. "Why didn't you tell me it was a kid?" Traoré smiled faintly. "Because you needed to see him for yourself, yeah." Moment was interrupted by a shout from the edge of the crowd. A woman pushed forward, her face a mix of fear and urgency. It was Amina, Kofi's mother. "Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice shaking, "please don't give him false hope. We've lost too much already." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling. Steve froze, the weight of her words hitting hard. Amina's eyes were fierce, protective, but tired. She'd heard Steve's voice too, but unlike Kofi, she'd learned to guard her heart against promises that didn't last. Steve looked from Amina to Kofi, then to Traoré, who stood silently, his expression unreadable. The tension was thick. Here was the conflict laid bare. Kofi's dream was real, but so was Amina's fear, and Steve, for all his fame, wasn't sure he could bridge that gap. He thought of the skepticism back in Ouagadougou, of Mariam's warning that his visit might be seen as a stunt. He thought of Madame Diallo, the teacher who'd whispered her own buried dreams. This wasn't just about Kofi's school. It was about proving hope could be more than a fleeting spark in a place worn down by struggle. Then came the surprise. Traoré raised a hand, quieting the crowd. "Mr. Harvey," he said, his voice steady, "I didn't bring you here just for Kofi." He gestured to the children behind him, dozens of them holding drawings and small gifts. "These kids, this village, they've all heard you. They've been waiting for someone to show them their dreams matter." Traoré paused, his eyes softening. "And so have I." He pulled a small photo from his pocket. A faded image of a boy, maybe 15, standing by a market stall. "This was me," Traoré said. "I was Kofi once. Your voice reached me when I thought no one could. Now I'm asking you to help me reach them." Steve's jaw dropped. The president of Burkina Faso, a man leading a nation through chaos, was admitting he'd once been a boy with nothing, clinging to a stranger's words. The crowd was silent, but the air hummed with possibility. Steve realized the stakes weren't just Kofi's dream. They were Traoré's legacy, the village's future, and his own purpose. The climax hit like a wave. Steve turned to Kofi, kneeling again. "I read your letter, son," he said, his voice steady now. "And I'm not here to make promises I can't keep. But I'm telling you this. I'm going to help you build that school." The crowd erupted, in cheers, but Steve raised a hand. "Hold on, y'all. This ain't just about me, it's about all of us." He looked at Amina, who was crying now, her hands clasped tight. "Ma'am, I know you're scared. I've been there. But your boy's dream is real and I'm in." He turned to Traoré. "Mr. President, you got a deal. My foundation's all in. Books, teachers, whatever it takes." Traoré nodded, a rare smile breaking through. Kofi ran to Steve, wrapping his arms around him, sobbing. Steve hugged him, back, tears streaming. The crowd sang, the same song from earlier, its melody weaving through the moment like a thread tying them all together. As the sun set, Steve and Traoré walked to a quiet corner of the village, away from the crowd. Steve held Kofi's notebook, now signed with a promise. "You knew this would hit me hard, didn't you?" Steve said, half laughing. Traoré chuckled. "I knew because it hit me hard too. You gave me hope when I was that boy. Now we give it to them." The subplots resolved in the days that followed. Amina, hesitant at first, joined a village committee to plan the school, her trust slowly rebuilding. Madame Diallo offered to teach, her own dreams rekindled. Mariam, Traoré's aide, admitted the visit had shifted her perspective. She saw hope as a weapon, not a distraction. Steve's foundation pledged funds and Traoré's government matched them, turning Kofi's dream into a real project. Back in LA, Steve went live on his show, holding up Kofi's notebook. "This," he said, voice thick, "is why I do what I do. Hope travels, it finds you no matter where you are." He played the village's song, its notes carrying across the world. The takeaway was clear. Hope isn't just a word, it's a bridge. Steve, a comedian from Cleveland, and Traoré, a soldier-turned-leader, found each other through shared struggles, proving that voices can cross oceans and change lives. Kofi's school broke ground a month later, a small step, but a real one. Amina smiled more, Kofi kept writing, and Traoré stood taller, his faith in his people renewed. For the audience, the lesson lingered. Your words, your dreams, your fight, they matter more than you know. As Steve boarded his plane home, he looked out at the Burkina Faso sky, whispering, "Thank you, God, for letting me see this." And, somewhere in a village under a mango tree, Kofi dreamed a little bigger, knowing someone had heard him.